Hi all, it's Les Bosin, Fear of Flying clinical psychologist. Welcome, it's March the 1st here in Melbourne. A bit of a dreary day as we complete summer, our southern summer, and move into autumn, or as our American friends would say, the fall. So I want to talk to you about a subject that brought a lot of people to my YouTube site, and that's the issue of turbulence. Some of you may have come here because the YouTube algorithm pushed you here, because somewhere along the way you mentioned planes and flying and turbulence or something, or maybe you actually did a search in a search engine for turbulence and you located my video with the jelly and the plane wobbling and the jelly. Still, people like that very much for all sorts of reasons. And that was recorded, by the way, 3 years ago, almost, not quite to the day, but 3 years ago in a month. So it still is very popular, which I'm very grateful for. So glad you made it here. I do want to talk about turbulence today because there's a site I want to share with you that came my way via Twitter. It's similar to a number of apps that you can buy for your phone that predicts turbulence on your particular flight that you may be taking in a day. It won't go beyond a day because the weather patterns are inherently unpredictable if you go out beyond about 36 hours. So it tends to restrict itself to the next day, this app. Now, there are other places you can go to which give you long-term forecasts for what your flying might be like in a week's time. And you have to ask yourself, what does that mean? Why do you want to know what the turbulence pattern of your particular flight, which might be, say, New York to Los Angeles or Los Angeles to Melbourne, what that's going to be like along your journey? And I want to suggest to you that by wanting to know what is my flight going to be like, for those of you who experience your source of fear of flying as being turbulence, and somewhere maybe between a third and a half of people that I see in my practice, a turbulence comes into the picture at some point. Maybe it's the most significant one, or maybe it's second in the list. People do want to know, what's this flight going to be like? And that's because they want to know, how do I protect myself? Now, the protection could be, I'm committed to this flight. What should I do on this flight? Or it could be, I'm not committed to this flight. I don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time. I can delay a couple of days and try and get a better flight. Now, inveterate flyers do that all the time, but not because they necessarily want to avoid turbulence, but maybe they're hoping that on a Tuesday, as I do, the fare is a little bit cheaper, and if I can go on a Tuesday rather than a Wednesday and stay overnight, I'll do that because the fares can often be much cheaper on a Tuesday compared to a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday. Other times it could be that I've checked the loadings and it looks pretty good. I've got a good chance of getting an upgrade on this flight if I go on a particular day, if it's not that important to me to be at a certain place at a certain time. Okay, so some of us who aren't engaged in turbulence fears will be choosy about what planes and what flights we go on because it's a preference. We have a reason for doing this, and it's not about safety. It's not about trying to avoid, the big word, discomfort, or the sense that it's going to be dangerous if our plane encounters turbulence. Okay? So one of the essential things that I want my patients to work towards is a combination to start with of turbulence might be uncomfortable, it's not unsafe. I know what to do to care for myself in a plane that is experiencing turbulence, whether it be predictable. We knew ahead of time, as the pilots would often say, oh, it's going to be a bit bumpy on the way out, or it's going to be a bit bumpy on the way in, or about 5 hours into our flight, it's going to be a bit bumpy. So it could be that it's predictable. Sometimes it's unpredictable, such as the turbulence that pilots are very concerned about, and that's clear air turbulence, where it's kind of almost seat of the pants flying, where the radar and other devices to predict meteorological phenomena do not predict clear air turbulence. That's getting better and better, by the way, with satellite imagery and all sorts of things. So the amount of clear air turbulence that is unpredictable is reducing over time. So, and planes, of course, are getting better, like cars are, at avoiding or predicting these things. And on top of the plane's wings, they've got little surfaces that are now starting to appear on wings, which dampen down the small perturbations that smooth out flights. Just like cars have got shock absorbers that smooth out the little bumps and give you a nice boulevard ride, except the really big ones. So there's only so much the wing can do to mitigate the effects of turbulence. But of course, that's turbulence coming towards the plane. But if there's side turbulence, or what we might call crosswinds, the side of the plane, the bigger the plane, the more the side of the plane is going to act like a huge sail and be pushed that way. So you're going to get a kind of a swaying effect of turbulence rather than the up and down part. And for some people, the sway part, like on board a ship, is the part that can induce a little bit of motion sickness, not necessarily fear as such. So let's introduce you to the website I want to show to you. And it's at the risk that some of you will not use this information wisely, and it could increase your fears if you don't use this wisdom I'm going to pass on to you well. Okay? Just to say that, there was a time when I was allowed to go into flight decks, pre-2001, and oftentimes when the pilots found out the work that I was doing, they'd say, Liz, what should we do? If we know there's turbulence ahead, should we make an announcement that in about an hour's time it's going to get a bit bumpy? Or should we not say anything and say afterwards that was a little bit of turbulence that we experienced, but we're back on course, we're all doing okay? Should we make predictions or keep storm? That is, say nothing. To which I said, yes. There is no definitive answer. Some people will appreciate knowing ahead of time so they can do what they need to do. Others will say, don't tell me, I don't want to spend a half an hour worrying about this. And that's because they don't know what to do except to worry. Okay? So the answer was always yes. Of course, when it came to their own crew, especially on long-haul flights, pilots would always tell their cabin crew what was coming up. 5 hours into the flight, the maps are showing we're going to have a little bit of turbulence. So let's try and get the meal service over and done with. Be prepared for us to give you the signal to walk around the cabin, make sure everyone's got seatbelts on. There's an outside chance we may have to ask you to take your seat, so make sure everything's locked down. So pilots in the pre-briefing, especially on long-haul flights, will sit down with the crew, introduce themselves, of course, if they don't know each other, and tell them what the route is going to bring. And that way the cabin manager can then tell the captain, if you like, of the inside, can then tell his crew or her crew, we need to get this done before these times, and this is how the meal services are going to run. And it varies from flight to flight within certain parameters. So let's go and have a look at the website I've got in mind, and it's called Turbly, and I'm going to bring it here. Now, as I said, it's not dissimilar to other app-based ones, but you can use it quite nicely. There may be an app for this, I'm not sure. Here it is here. I'll get myself out of the way, put myself over here. There we go. And now you can see what it looks like. So it's a very simple interface to begin with. You have, as I look at it now with you, an area which is here, which is your departure airport, and you have here, which is your arrival airport. And notice it only gives you 2 days, today or tomorrow, maximum 36 hours ahead because of the variations in forecasting. We don't want to try and make predictions that far ahead, which will serve to upset people or just be inaccurate, and you can't really plan very well that way. So that said, why don't we I tried this just before I did the recording. If I did tomorrow, it didn't work here in Australia because we are already tomorrow for many of you where you are. If you're in the northern hemisphere, if that is you're behind us in time. In North America, for instance, you're between 14 and I don't know 19 hours behind us. So for you, we're already in tomorrow. So let me put in the the two airports that I frequently travel with my patients. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and just to show you what this. And that's a very nice. I like the layout. It's really nice. And so I'll put in Melbourne where I am. There we go. Gives you the 3-character thing. MEL is Melbourne. I'm going to put in Hobart in Tasmania, which is where I fly over water, and it's often quite bumpy because the airport is located at a river mouth, and there's often mountains either side. It's often quite bumpy. So we'll put in Hobart, and what's going to do is bring up today's flights. So here we go. We've got a search going on, and now we have today's flights, which is really interesting. We don't have to guess. We don't have to say this is the flight that I'm going to be taking. You could, but we can identify which is our flight. Now, as I do this recording, it's almost 2 o'clock, and so this the particular flight I've got in mind. Let's have a look. So this one's already on its way, it would seem. It should have just been pushed back. Jetstar 711 is going to leave at 4 p.m. So I think we should have a look at that one. There we go. So we're forecasting ahead of time what's going to happen on this flight. So now we see what is the picture. And we see up the top, it says aircraft. And we identifies what the aircraft is. It's an A320. It weighs 73 tons. It has 2 engines. I'll make this a little bit bigger so it makes it clear for you to see. And it's an interesting thing. It says that its altitude, misspelling, is 12,500 meters maximum altitude. But you see in brackets that this is a short range flight. It's actually about 57 minutes. So the actual altitude might only get to 10,200. Okay, that's all interesting to know. And now if we come back here, I'll make this a little bit, so I have to get myself out of the way. Bear with me 1 second while I get myself. I always do these our videos live with very little post-editing. So I'll just move myself out the way here. And now you can see the expected levels of turbulence from light levels. Now I don't know how they measure it. We could probably go in. Let's click on this. Light turbulence, smooth flight conditions, moderate, difficulty in walking, food service. So they actually give you a classification. What do they mean by moderate? What do you think it's going to say about strong? It's going to, I don't know, it's probably going to say strap yourself in. Crew might have to strap in. Let's see what it says. Strong strains against seatbelts. There you go. And now you can see the predictions that it makes, starting with the takeoff. So some wobbles here, but that's not unexpected out of Melbourne. Of course, it doesn't necessarily say which direction it's going to be taking, because Melbourne has 2 runways. So it's making some predictions that no matter which runway you're going to be using, north, south, east, west, it's going to be a little bit bumpy. But not very much at all. It's staying within the light range. And then smooths out for the crossing of what's called Bass Strait between Victoria, where I live, and Tasmania. Picks up a little bit as we enter Tasmania, which is pretty typical over the coastline, and then coming in for a landing here at the very end where it tips up. If I can point it to you, you can't quite. If I move myself across, I can point it. Hold on, there we go. So if I point just here, you can see how it goes up, which is really kind of interesting. Now we have some wind speeds. I have some wind speeds for you. This is in kilometers per hour, 0 to 150. So some quite extensive, fast speeds. But notice what it says here, similar to a tailwind. So it's expecting tailwinds down from Melbourne to Hobart. Some quite strong winds here, but as we come in for a landing, the winds will decrease as we get lower to the ground. Maybe picks up a little bit as we swing around to come in for a landing. And the arrows are pointing to the direction of the wind. And here's the main thing. Here's the current wind as we're speaking now. And here's the seasonal average, which is the line with the dots to it, which I'll show you here, lines with the dots here. Yeah. So we're a little bit above average at the moment. And then you've got tailwind. Sorry, I've made myself almost invisible too. There we go. You've got tailwind, which is the arrow over here that points to the right. You've got headwind, which points to the left. And then you've got crosswinds, which are up and down. And you can see for most of this, this area here, we've got crosswinds most of the time. So it might be a little bit of sway, but at the speeds we're going to be going at, not such a big deal. Let's scroll down a little bit further and see what it says. Takeoff and landing, shaky takeoff. Crosswind at the expected runway, 11.5 knots, which is not unusual and quite manageable. Melbourne Airport has one runway. Remember I said east-west, it's got runways like this. And then at the bottom, you've got shaky land, crosswind at runway, because there's only one runway at Hobart, 10.8 knots. Again, well within limits, so it might mean a little bit of wobble as you come in, as the pilots keep their wings level. So let me make myself bigger, and I'll just, you can do this for your own flight if you like. Okay. So this is expected from here in about 2 hours from when I'm making this recording. So you can put your own stuff in, but here's the thing. This is really useful for pilots and for others for whom being out of the seat might be important. So if you suffer an irritable bowel syndrome, which might mean you have to be readily getting out of your seat to go to the loo because you don't get much warning, it might be useful for you to know about turbulence, because that might be when you're told to take your seat and you can't move. So it's really nice to know when this is going to happen, and you can make your moves accordingly and just be ready for that. Flight attendants and others, it's useful to know what we might be in for. But if you're a regular flyer who suffers with fear of flying turbulence worries, this may not be so good. And I want to suggest to you, as I come to the close of this recording, here's the bottom line. We'll do more of this in another recording. Here's the bottom line. Your task is to be able to say, you know what, this is interesting, and I can see how pilots and cabin crew and people with special conditions would really want to do their research. But for the average person, if I want to become a better flyer, so that I'm not tearing my hair out and worrying about this and taking medications and special music and distracting myself, my task has got to be to remind myself turbulence might be uncomfortable, but if I know what I'm doing, seatbelt on, not moving around too much, it's not unsafe. I need to check the overheads at the end of the flight because things can move. It's not unsafe. Ultimately, you want to be able to say, no matter what gets thrown at me in the course of regular commercial flying, I can handle it. I have a plan. If you look at some of my other videos, you'll see what I do. Have your music on, bouncing in the seat, palms upwards, rather than doing your normal grabbing on. Okay, so there's things to do. Go and look at my other videos about how to manage turbulence. But this is the most important thing here. No matter what gets thrown at me, I can handle this. And ultimately, that's the mastery part. Actually, it's more coping. The mastery part is when you say, I think I should try and get together some flights down to a location where there's guaranteed turbulence, which is why I fly with my patients to Hobart or Launceston, guaranteed turbulence. And I get people to sit at the back of the aircraft on the return flight where the tails are going to wag a little bit. So whatever turbulence is there, we're going to feel it even more. You might go, oh my gosh, you're cruel. But the idea is no matter what happens, I can handle this. It may not be pleasant. I might suffer a little bit of motion sickness, but I have to separate out this is uncomfortable from this is dangerous. The two things do not go together in flying. Just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean it's dangerous. Do not fuse discomfort with danger, and that's what most people do. And then they act accordingly. They grip the seats, they make it worse, they avoid the flying, they check it all out a week before, and they just perpetuate their fear of turbulence. We want to turn it back the other way. And the ultimate other way is when turbulence starts to happen and bounce around, people are going, whoa, you're saying, hey, is that all you've got? Throw some more at me, I can handle you. The ultimate mastery. Now, pilots don't do that. They just say, no, we don't want to do that. It's uncomfortable for our passengers. We'll go around, we'll go above where it might be. But you as a passenger have got to be able to eventually get to the position to say, I know what this is, I know what to do about it. And when you get really confident and you're really doing a lot of practice. Is that it? Bring it on, let's go and find it, which is what I do with my patients when we fly, but only when I think we're both ready to do this. I hope you found this helpful. I'll be back with more videos later on. Take care.